So today on my podcast, I have Fred Israels, and Fred is from London, Ontario, and he has a YouTube channel where I'll let Fred explain it. Fred.
Well, YouTube channel was COVID related, something for me to do in my spare time. And my interest is in antiques and collectibles and related things. So in that time, I made 50 short videos related to antiques and collectibles, but it's spread to other topics, and certainly genealogy is one of them, and some of my trips as well. So yeah, it's been a labor of love.
Do a lot of artifacts. What are you doing, and what are you hoping to find? And I know I'm a person that loves history, and I have lots of things. It's just because they remind me of certain things, or they have a just sentimental value, or it's just something I find really unique. Like I have an old iron behind me I found at my grandmother's house that was from the 1860s. So
yeah, no, that's amazing. I was a high school history teacher,
okay.
And one of the things I discovered along the way was that students really were turned on by me using primary sources, using real things to learn about history. So all the primary sources that I used, I would work around like old photographs and old cemeteries and buildings and interviews with old people, and it went on and on and on. So that really was a successful way of teaching. And then I taught after I retired, I taught at the Faculty of Education at Western, and I was teaching teachers how to teach history. And they actually allowed me to create a separate course, learning history through primary sources. So this is the turn on for students learning history.
Yeah, I know myself, history, when things become sort of that personal connection, and having, like you said, the primary source of an actual object that sort of attaches you to the time and the place. So what are some of your interesting finds?
Oh, that could be another whole show by itself, by the way. I did also, when I retired, I had to continue to look for stuff, and I started doing a flea market and antique shows, and along the way I met people who had things, and I would buy them and resell them and so on. I remember one time going to a place about an hour away, and the man said he had some old toys and stuff. So it was out on the farm, and I got there, and there was some beat up toys and some books with no covers and a few other things. And I said, "Oh, I'll take the toys again." "No, you have to take it all." Anyway, long story short, I get one of the books home with no covers, and it was it was dated 1787, and it was a history of slavery in Africa. Looked it up on a used book site. It was worth $2,000 with a cover, but I've got $900 for it on eBay. So, you never know. You don't want to assume anything is junk.
No, it's you really need to know what you're sort of looking for, and just take a chance on it. I know it was just my grandmother just passed away just in April. She was almost to 100, but the summer before, we were my mom and myself, we were going through her basement, and my mom has no really attachment to family history and stuff, and I was just trying to save things, just like that. She's like, "Well, that's no good. That's I'll show you something here. I found it. Is it kind of to my talk about possessions? This is it's a Bible. Nothing special, but the inscription. My grandfather was in World War II, and this was his mother-in-law, who he just got married the day he shipped out, sent to him, and he had for Christmas. He would have been actually, I believe at that point he was in France, possibly Germany, but I think because he'd been in the Italian campaign when they had liberated Rome, so he after that, his division started heading up, and I believe they were in France by Christmas, the southern France area. So yeah, that's something to me that's, I don't know what it has any value, but these are the other things.
It has a lot of value to to yourself. That's the main thing.
Now these, I don't know if you can see them. These are silk that are hand embroidered. This one says, to my wife, from Rome, 1944.
Yes. Well,
So,
that's wonderful. No,
yeah.
I enjoyed the hunt as much as I did enjoying selling, getting rid of this stuff. Like, I never knew what I was going to find.
Yeah.
One thing after another. I got lucky too, but it didn't happen every month. But I did that for about 30 years, and if I'd have kept everything, it would have been quite interesting. I had a newspaper with a headline, "Titanic sinks," but it was the London Daily Mirror. It was about, they were slow with their communication, and the headline said, "Mighty Titanic sinks, everyone saved." Now, I have never seen that paper again, and I really wish I had kept it, because that had to be a one of a kind.
Yeah, definitely. It must have been like an early. They went to press too early before they got the whole story.
Well, they got the whatever message, and they didn't get it right. But the artifacts. It's a wonderful thing to find, to look at.
So you go and you find these things, you sell them. When you find them, are you just looking at the actual value, or monetarily, are you looking at actually the historical value and trying to figure out the history of how that item might have happened?
Both, because of the expenses that I incurred, setting up at a market. I had to be able to pay the rent, but certainly the value historically and otherwise was always interesting to me, for sure. I also have something I could show you that's a personal
Sure.
in a story with it. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll move my. Does that? There, I think you can see that.
Okay.
See, it's a window. Let's see here.
Yeah.
The window says J Israels and JZ. And that came, and tell me if you can see that photograph.
Just a little to the left. You got to move it. Might be. Yep.
Anyways, that's where that came from, in a little town called Zutphen in Holland. And my dad was born. My great grandfather started a dry goods store in that town, about an hour from Amsterdam. I visited there in the 60s, and I saw this piece of glass, and it had my family name on it and everything. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Didn't think about it because I was kind of young at that time to worry about things like that. And 2 or 3 times later, the last time being 2002, believe it or not, it was an antique shop. And I went in and I gave the lady my story, and I said, would you be willing to sell me that glass in that door? Because that's my great-grandfather and my grandfather. And she said, sure. And he replaced the glass and come and pick it up in a couple of days, which I did. Cost me $1,000, but it was well worth it. But that is my great-grandfather, and that's this guy right here. Let's see. Can't see. Can you see it?
No, more there. They're a little more towards. There we go.
Yeah, that's my great-grandfather. And
Okay.
that's from relatives, and that's also my great-grandmother. But they were the ones that started the store. And then about 2 years ago, we went to Amsterdam, and that store was now closed, and it was boarded up, and a construction guy was coming around, and he opened the door, and I went over to him and explained who I was and so on, and he said, "You want to see inside?" Sure. So what he showed me inside was this bell that was above the door. Again, I don't know if you can see it.
There we go. You're back, Fred.
Yeah, I hit a button. Well, anyways, I hit a button when I was showing you that. I better not do that anymore. But that bell, you can hear it. That was in that store since the 1890s, and now it's above the piece of glass that I retrieved in 2002. So, it's all part of my family history, and it's an artifact. And aren't I the lucky guy?
And just like reuniting old friends, I guess. They were back to above the glass where it probably hung for years.
Yeah. No, so that was the planned part of finding my family artifacts. But there's another, and I won't show you, but it's a painting up above, and it was done by my grandfather, and I had no idea that he painted or anything. And I Googled one time my cousin's name, who was the same name as my grandfather, and up came an antique shop, an art shop in Toronto, and it had this painting done by a John Israels. So I investigated it, and it was my grandfather. It's a painting of Stratford, Ontario, downtown, and I purchased it. So that was quite accidental, so you never know. Like there's stuff around that, you don't even know about sometimes about your family.
It's that would be interesting. So did you weren't aware that your grandfather was an artist, or?
No, I hadn't really been that close to them. The family wasn't close to him, but I verified through a cousin that yes, indeed, he did paint, and she thinks that was taken by one of the nephews to earn some money for some reason or another, and that's how it got out of the hands of the family. But lucky me, I just happened to run into it, and I retrieved it.
And that's all it takes on, especially now with the internet. Those happenstances can happen a little more often if you're searching things that you might never come across before. Like, I'm sure you wouldn't have walked in that art store to have seen it. So
no, not at all. No, there's more to the story, but I won't tell you. It's a little detailed, but I happened to go to that site for a reason, and it was for a entirely different reason related to a cousin that had been killed in a car accident. And then that name showed up, same name as my cousin, and there was the piece of art.
Wow, it's amazing. So you said that you do. I noticed that you, besides artifacts, you've written a few books where you've talked to people, and
sorry, go ahead.
And I've noticed that, and that's I'm always fascinated by those stories of going and talking to those people who lived in times we might not have been able to have a chance to experience ourselves. I know when I was in university, I studied medieval history, but I took a Canadian history course, and it was on the Great Depression, and it was actually Canada post World War I, pre World War II. It was. But we talked about the Great Depression, and I had at the time Dalhousie University. I went to the University of Kings, which Dalhousie's part of it, or vice versa, depends on your bias. But they had in Nova Scotia, the universities had, if you were over 65, you could take free courses, and there was two gentlemen that had lived through the Depression, and I automatically partnered up with them because they just had so many wonderful stories.
Oh yeah, no, that'd be neat. Well, part of that primary source approach in high school, I had students interview their grandparents if possible, or neighbors, elderly people, and they put it on tape at that time, and I listened to it all. That inspired me to do the same thing. I actually have two books here I can show you. This is Londoners Remember Part 2, and I did a Part 1, and it was based on interviews with 80 older people. This copy here sold 6,000 in my community in the mid-90s. This one, I still have a lot of copies, and I'm still selling it, but in bookstores and so on. But I've donated the tapes. At that time, I used tapes to the local library, and it's a treasure trove of memories of this city. And I did the same thing with my family. I interviewed my uncle, and the only regret I have is I didn't catch my parents before they passed away. That's what really should happen. People should be aware. That's a very important part of family history. So between the artifacts and the oral history, and the old photos, of course, you scrounge anywhere you can to put it all together.
The oral history, there's so much there, and it's knowing sometimes how to ask the right questions to get the information that you're looking for out of them. And often I know I have sort of the same regret. My dad's parents, they both passed away before I really got re-interested in genealogy and had a chance. And same as my mom's father. My mom's mom just passed away this year, and like I had mentioned earlier, and I started to get some information. Luckily, she still has a brother who's 90-something that I'm hoping to be able to talk to more and get some family things, because there's a whole side of the family that I'm sure they have stories and things they remember their grandparents telling them about growing up. And
absolutely. The oldest lady I interviewed was 103. But her memory was a little foggy, but there were a few gems that she came out with, like the fire. She remembered the fire being pulled by horses, by gray horses, and they were just tearing down the dirt road, dust flying and the bells are clanging. And, here's a 103-year-old woman telling me this story, and I'm thinking how great that was. But I want to share a little letter I got from a student who they said, it's very brief. He said, I just wanted to say a belated thank you for having our history class do the conversations with our grandparents. Basically, it says my grandmother passed away, and I pulled it out and listened to it. It's really wonderful to have this tape to remember her by. And so that's what I was trying to get across to kids. These things, the people in this book here, they've all passed away. I mean, they were all older people in the mid-90s. So, like, if they die without anybody taking any interest in their stories, it's like a library burning down. The books are gone forever. But if you can get those memories preserved in some form or fashion, boy, that's a valuable piece of family history.
And community history too. I kind of lucked into my great grandmother, who was born in Scotland and moved to Cape Breton when she was 13. She grew up in a small mining community, not even a town, in Cape Breton. I guess she grew up. She was 13, but that's where she wound up settling, getting married, and lived her whole life. And there was, in the 1970s, somebody in Cape Breton at the University College Cape Breton at that time, was interviewing people to find out about mining life. And amongst hours and hours of audio that he had, I stumbled upon that he had this recording of my great-grandmother, recorded about a year before she died. So it was just amazing to hear. And she talked about my grandfather when he was a child, and her husband, who my mother didn't know because he had passed away before she was born. So it was just really priceless. It's so valuable to me, and I've had so many cousins that I've connected with online because I've been able to find it.
And to you, it's really valuable. But at the end of most of my interviews, people would say, "Oh, I hope what I had to say was of any value." They didn't think it was any value at all, because it's part of their life, I guess. But it was gold. And you talked about how to ask the right questions. I always had these students remember follow-up questions. Don't leave it at one question. Follow-up questions. And I give them an example. Like I talked to a 95-year-old lady, and she remembered a song that she said, I remember a song that we used to sing in the First War. and she gave the title. Now, I could have just went on and said, "Oh, that's really nice," and then I'd say, "Well, do you remember it?" And then she started singing it to me, and that was so precious. This 96-year-old woman singing a song from World War I that she remembered. And so the follow-up questions are really important.
It is, because that's where you're going to get the nuggets, because they're not thinking it's important. They like you said at the end, I hope you got something maybe interesting, but they don't. I mean, think of your own life. There's probably things that somebody who's wasn't there would find so interesting because they didn't get to experience it, and just having that sharing. And so when you were teaching your students to this, you talked about questions and what were you the initial was just to talk to your grandparents. Did you give them guidelines for what kind of questions they should be asking? Because I know that's one thing, and a lot of times in genealogy forums, I see new people. That's one of the things they said. What should I ask my grandmother? What things should I be wanting to find out? And I do from the perspective of when I answer the question, both from the family tree, but more about let's find the family stories. And
well, no, that's something you just don't send them out and say, here, go interview your grandparents. There's a lot of planning goes into that. So I would have them listen to examples, and then we would talk about making a kind of a master script. You don't stick to it necessarily, but you've got some ideas to rely on. And so they weren't sent out there cold. And I like always the chronological approach. I'd have them talk about their earliest memories, and then in school when they were in elementary school, and then as they were teenagers, and so on, so that there was some kind of logic to the questioning, not just questions all over the place.
And were the students surprised most of the times by the answers?
They were amazed.
Yeah.
Didn't know how my grandfather met my grandmother, or I didn't know that this happened or that happened. No, they were genuinely happy about what the experience was for themselves. It was wonderful, as it was for me when I did these interviews. Just incredible. I talked to one lady here in the city who said her brother was a Canadian hero, and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Oh, well, he joined the Canadian Army at 16 years of age, 14, in World War I. Lied about his age. Didn't see active battle, but was there. And when he was 18, he left. He came home. Then he joined the American Air Force in Detroit, in Michigan, because he liked these new fandangled things called airplanes. And anyway, long story short, he became the brigadier general of Selfridge Air Force Base, and he's buried in Arlington Cemetery. Nobody knows about him in this city. I discovered that accidentally by talking to his sister. So I tried to get historians here to actively find some way to honor this person.
Yeah, I find so much now people don't want to talk about our history. They want to change it, and we have such a vibrant history of of families that came to Canada and survived and made Canada what it is today. Whether you like it or don't, but it's what made us, and
That's right.
You can't sort of deny it. And I'm sure, I'm thinking back to the students talking to their grandparents. I'm sure they got some good ammunition of stories about their parents growing up too that they probably didn't learn as well. Hadn't known.
Especially the one guy who used to sneak out, he went out at night and he sneaked back in because he was really late. He figured he was going to fool his father, but his father set up a chair with pots and pans right in front of the door, and he walks in late, and all of a sudden the pans go all over the place. The father said, "I told you I'd catch you." Yeah, there's great stories like that.
And you know what? It probably made them realize that their parents weren't that much different than them as well.
Yeah, a little stricter.
A little stricter. Their grandparents might have been than their parents. So your own story, like you say, talking about other people. So just tell me a little bit about your own story, because that's that's as important too. Because one thing I try to talk when I talk to people about family history, one of the questions I always ask them: what are you doing to leave your mark on your family history? What type of things?
Well, I'm a big believer in creative approach to preserving my family history, and I like to do it in the form of a book. So I can show you 3 things that I've done here. This is a binder that is very thick, and it's my family history. All the results of I can pull out a few things in a minute, but all of the results of my hard research over the last number of years are in this binder, and every one of my grandchildren and my children have a copy of this. And then when I pass away, they don't get this until I pass away, I have my own life story. And so everything in here, pictures, it starts right at the very beginning, my very earliest memories, and follows me all the way through. In fact, every year I paste in, I've got some blank pages, I paste in the most current events. So there's one of these for each of my children, and I really tell it as thoroughly as I possibly can. There's everything in here, every one section on numbers and that, the cars that I owned in my life, the trips that I've taken, all this stuff. But and all the photographs, just
wow.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And I enjoyed that so much, and it was easy to do. I mean, I did it at Staples. I would have a photograph. I'd tape it lightly on a piece of paper and type underneath, and then I'd photocopy it, and eventually I had all these pages, and it looks very professional. It's bound. And so between this binder, which they all have, and my book, which they all will have, and then just one other thing. My wife passed away going on 5 years ago, and when she passed away, I did a book about her life for her son and her family too, pictures and so on. So I'm a great believer in if you don't write it down, they won't know. Like, I pass away, they don't know what's in this binder. And so if you allow me for a minute, I've got just a couple of interesting things that I did, and in my own personal Israel's, it sounds Jewish. It's not. I haven't been able to find any Jewish connection, but it's Dutch. In fact, it was as conservative Dutch as you can get, because when I was younger, it was a Christian Reformed church, and boy, that gets pretty conservative. But anyways, this is a very important page. I got my family. And I worked through Ancestry.com, and I worked through that for maybe a year. And I got my family back to 1712, and I discovered that the long and short of this is that Israel was, and it was with a Z at that time, the first name of the father, and the son or the daughter when they were born. Like Anna was the first one that had the name Israel, which meant Anna, son of Israel, a daughter of Israel. And it went on down the line. And I've got that all researched right back. I've got 11 great grandfathers documented in this binder. And I went to that town in Holland. I went to the archives there. I got printouts. I went to Pier 21 in Halifax. I got the printout of the ship passenger list. Also the family information, the immigration information, birth dates, and what have you. I got photographs of the ship that they came over in. Each of them. And the interesting thing is my parents both came over separately, of course, in 1926 on 2 separate ships. And that's what I got at Pier 21. And as you know, there's more questions that come up than answers sometimes. And I don't know why my mother's side left from Southampton, England, and my father's side left from Antwerp, Belgium, same year, different ships. One ended up in Montreal, the other ended up in Quebec, and they took the train to Chatham, Ontario. And that's where they met, in Chatham, Ontario. So I've got half this binder for my father's side and half my mother's side, contributed by relatives who had information and photographs, contributed to my research. I wrote Genealogist to see if they had any way I could improve my research. There's a famous painter, an artist in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam named Joseph Israels, and I was determined to see if he was related, but I could not make any connections. A genealogist that I got contacted in Holland didn't think there was a connection because, there's a lot of branches of the Israel first name with S added on the end way back. And so it was a couple of years in the making here, but I think my family's very lucky to have this.
It is, and have it organized and be able to trace it. Now, if one of your students was interviewing you, or one of your grandchildren, what would the thing in your life that you would want to make sure that they understood that is important to who you are, or how would you let them know?
Hard work. Do the very best you can in everything you do, and I see that in my grandchildren. I have some grandchildren who are in university and who are exceptional, and they're very, very hard workers. And they don't take anything for granted. They work for it. That's one thing. I think, just enjoy your life and get the most out of it. Don't waste any time, especially when you get older. So I have a lot of suggestions in the binder, in my life story book related to that kind of thing. The things that I think made me successful.
Yeah.
And it was determination and creativity. In my case, I owe a lot to my creative juices. Just the YouTube videos. I had nothing to do in the COVID, so I thought I got to do something. And I had all these props, like I had stuff from my teaching, and I retired, and it was fairly easy for me and very enjoyable. But I think they'll appreciate my life through that book, and I guess we all want to be appreciated. So.
Definitely, and we want to be remembered. I mean, that's we live our life, and hopefully we've made a mark on it, and that somebody can see.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the book there, though, there's the factual content. They came over in 1926, but there's also the what should I say? Not the emotional, but the parts that aren't factual, the feelings and things like. Out in a book like that too, they realize that family is important, and I hope that. And I always say to my grandchildren, make sure that you add to this binder as you go along for your kids, right? And I think they will.
Definitely, family is probably the one of the most important things we have. It's what in a way makes us what we are. We don't realize how much of our family's past experiences play on us. Now, I have a question, because I often tie a lot of my own family memories to food. There's always those things. Whether it's a certain holiday food. I love the idea of there's certain things that just remind me of, that's my my grandmother, my grandfather always made that because my grandfather was a cook, and or one of the things when I started finding out my great grandmother, who I had known, and at the last time I saw her, I was 6, and then my dad was in the military, so we'd moved away, but she died a couple of years later. But I remember always going to her house. She was, well into her 80s, and she had an old coal stove still that she would have to shovel the coal in every day. She kept lit, but she made the best shortbread cookies.
That's
and it's it's surprising. A Scottish lady making shortbread cookie, probably not. But it's funny. I joined a Facebook group for the community that she's from, and when I started posting some of these things, people were like, they call her Granny Anderson, which is what I called her, and they weren't even related. And they remembered always going over, and she always had the best shortbread cookies.
Yeah. No, that's a story that's very similar to what I have heard too. My stepson, actually, he remembers his grandmother's chocolate chip cookies. And somewhere along the line, my wife got that recipe, and I make sure every once in a while that he gets some chocolate chip cookies, because his memory is just so clear about running down the street to get the chocolate chip cookies from his grandmother, and they are good.
Oh, and there's an example of a physical thing that evokes memories, and
Yes.
that's a good shortbread cookie still just evokes that memory of me as a little child. Anything any photo coot recipes or that
Another thing I would tell my students, history is more than stories about kings and queens and wars and what have you. It's also about the ordinary things. It's about just ordinary things. It's about shortbread cookies. It's about anything you can come up with. That's as important a memory as anything. And I think that's what's destroyed the teaching of history, is that in the old days, teachers concentrated on dates and things that happened, and they never let you think about, why was that important, or what could have been done differently. So that's how I try to avoid that sort of thing.
And I know myself in studying history in high school, and that's I missed. The concentration on dates and stuff. I did have a good history teacher in grade 11 that when we studied stuff, it was a lot more about the experience and understanding of what went on in that time. And encouraged us to explore the thoughts of the people at the time, what we could find, but through. And it was a lot harder then because we didn't have the internet. Kids have it easier. They can find a lot of these newspapers and stuff without having to dig and be able to get a handle of it. Let me see.
The old newspapers was another primary source that I used. I got lucky one time. I happened to obtain a couple of bundles of papers from the 1920s from my community, and of course I would put them out for the students and ask them to find things that showed that we haven't changed all that much, or that society was really different. And they just came up with great things, In a lot of ways we haven't changed, but in most ways we have. But we still have wars, we still have political problems, we still have we still have ads for women's clothing in the newspaper, and sales. The same marketing processes. I found a newspaper in my cleaning out my locker there a while back, and it was from World War II. Russian troops advance on Kiev. Well, does that sound familiar?
It does.
But it was part of the German-Russian thing, and the Russians had to go through there. So, but it was just so funny because the same headline was probably in the paper a month or so ago.
You're right. It's just history has a way a lot of times of repeating itself. Yeah. So with your. We talked a little bit about your YouTube channel at the beginning. Do you want to just tell me a little bit more? What is it? What what would people expect to find on it? Are you still adding? You said you started during COVID. Now that things are getting a little, there's a lot more freedom to go back out. Are you're taking off other things, so you're not keeping it up to date, or?
I didn't quite hear that. There was a little disruption there. Can you just
with the YouTube channel, just tell me a little bit about it. You said you started during COVID. Are you? And a lot of things that are we can do things more again. You might be, not have as much time as you would have.
Yeah. No, that was just so exciting. Studio One here, right in my living room. I took every possible topic I could think of, and it ended up to be 50, and kept it fairly short, like 15 minutes would be average. And I don't like to be the teacher so much as to share my knowledge of antiques and collectibles, old newspapers and old magazines and old photos, and I did some videos on some of the antique shows that I was a part of in Aberfoyle and near Guelph, Ontario. But those people are interested in antiques and collectibles. This is invaluable because they learn from my experience. They see from my own collectibles what the value of these things are, and so yeah, it was just something to do, and I had lots of time. That's right. So, yeah, if people do want to see that, all they have to do is go to youtube.com, Old Stuff Show. That's the name of the umbrella title for that, and then plug in each title after that. So related to the genealogy part, I have one called Oral History Interviews, Oh What Memories, and that would go like youtube.com, Old Stuff Show, Oral History Interviews, Oh What Memories. I have another called Oral History, Oh What Memories Part 2, and then I have another called Family Artifacts. So those three are the closest to kind of what we've been talking about today, and worth having a look.
Okay, definitely. Well, it's been really enjoyable talking to you, Fred. Just, I guess, one final question. Now, you mentioned your Dutch heritage. They came in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Do you think that experience of them coming to Canada has had an impact on your life? Not in the sense that but that value of being an immigrant. Because they had to start completely fresh. They had to learn and adapt to a new language and culture. When you were growing up, do you think that made it a different and maybe a better, or maybe even sometimes harder than if you're?
Well, you see, I was born in 1940s, and so by that time they were settled in, and I didn't get to. I'm part of the hard times of them getting settled and started in this country. But my dad worked, and there's part of the reason why I work hard all the time. My dad worked so hard to get what he got, and he was successful, but he had to work for it. It didn't come easy. So I think that is one thing that I learned from my parents. The other side, was their strong convictions, their beliefs, their values, their church-centered life when I was younger. Certainly that didn't hurt me. I didn't like it at the time. It seemed like it was torture, but I can say certainly that helped me to have good values, which I pass along to my kids and grandkids. I can see that in them too. But I know one of my aunts, she said one time, way back, she said, I think maybe we were a little too strict. If I had to do it over again, I'd probably not be quite so strict. But yeah, so it can't help but influence you. But I was a little later, you know, that they had gone through the Depression and the hard times, and part of them, they were hard. All my uncles on my mother's side, they were farmers, and they left Chatham in the late 40s, and they moved to north of Toronto, where I don't know if you've heard of the Holland Marsh, but it's an area where even today a lot of vegetables are growing, and a lot of my cousins and so on still farm that land. So they were very successful doing that, so they all worked hard, both sides of the family.
Well, great. Well, thank you again, Fred. I do really appreciate having you here.
Yeah, well, I hope people will tune into my channel. It doesn't matter what you're interested in; it might be there.
I'll make sure I put the links in my description too, so people can.
Yeah, well, that's great, Brian, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay, thank you. Hi. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this episode of How We Got Here. Make sure you check out the show notes for more information about today's topic and guests. How We Got Here is hosted and produced by Brian Nash. Title music from Tribute to O'Carolan by Luna Bajowski.